Hello, you are now entering the infinite void. Hang on tight. We cannot save you now.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. I'm your co-host Jacob.
And I'm your co-host Matty. And today's episode we are carrying on with our series The Future of Humanity with part 3 on the Kardashev scale. So do you want to kick this one off? Because you know a lot more about it than
Yeah,
I do.
I was going to say this is probably more so one of my topics rather than Matty's, so I'm going to try and do my best this week to...
I'm sure I'll learn something at least.
Yeah, but no, it's an interesting one because I think throughout this podcast, I must have mentioned it 100 times. I'm actually pretty sure if any episode about the future, I've probably mentioned it. So I'm kind of doing this as a service to myself, so I can finally shut up about it, really.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. It seems like it can kind of fit into this series that we've got as well, because it's essentially the idea of like what civilizations could achieve in the future based off our kind of history, I guess. But the actual proper description for it is the Kardashev scale is a method of measuring a civilization's level of technological advancement based off the amount of energy it is able to harness and use. So it kind of gets a little bit sci-fi with its like levels. There are 3 that kind of get broke down into this Kardashev scale, but there are people online and there have been a couple of books and stuff that kind of take it a little bit further and have hypothesized some type 4s and type 5s. But I think with this episode, we're going to try and keep it within type 1, type 2, type 3, and maybe discuss what the next one could be. But it's going to require a lot of technological advancements and probably a lot of time. But yeah, it's an interesting one because I think when you first hear that description, you kind of start thinking, oh, okay, well, humanity, where would humanity fall into that? And if it's just using technology, you can imagine that humanity is quite good because we've got solar capability, we've got wind capability, we've got like wave capability and tidal capability, all this kind of stuff for harnessing energy. And what's interesting about the Kardashev scale is it's kind of on a bigger scale, if that makes sense. So like type 1 civilizations are called planetary civilizations. And essentially they can use and store all of the energy available to the planet. And then a type 2 civilization is a civilization, and they're usually called stellar civilizations, and they can control and harness all of the energy on a planetary system. So that would be like us being able to do our entire solar system, including its star. And then a type 3 civilization, otherwise called a galactic civilization, would be able to control and harness all of the energy in its host galaxy. So they're pretty crazy. They're pretty far out there. It kind of gets a little bit like Star Trek and stuff with them. But what I find interesting about it is you can already kind of like tell straight off the bat that humanity isn't even a type 1, and I think we actually fall in at around 0.7. I think I think it might fluctuate between the 7 and the 8, but I think we're on about a 0.7, which is interesting because it's like, for me anyway, these are like one of the only things where we've kind of created a scale but we're not on it yet. Because like with like previous episodes where we've had like hypothesis like discussions, if it's about like the Fermi paradox or say even the Great Filter, because that probably applies to this, on whether the civilization can overcome these things or whether they kind of like burn themselves out. But with those, you kind of, we still are on that scale and we're kind of determining what's next because we're there kind of thing. But what's interesting about this is like we're not even on it yet kind of thing. And yeah,
it's interesting. And I think, you know, this is going to tie into the series more so the sort of level 1 and level 2 things, because level 3, is, I'm sure we'll discuss later on, is quite a long way off. But sort of level 1, being able to harness all of your planet's energy, is about 0.7. So it's still a long way to go. But it's something that they think probably 100, 200 years.
Yeah.
We could probably reach level 1. So yeah, it's interesting. And I think that's why it's good to talk about it in this series, because when we get into later episodes, we'll be able to talk more about the sort of the specifics of different energies and sort of consumption of things. So yeah, I think it's a good point to talk about it, and I'll looking forward to discussing it a bit more.
Yeah. And I think as well, like this also kind of applies to previous series that we've done, even with like AI and stuff, because especially with like the planetary civilization, AI is probably going to play a huge role in how we can best use harness of our energy. Do you know what I mean? Where the best place to put solar is, where the best place to put wind is, and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And as we've discussed in those episodes, how you can have like algorithms and you can have these massive servers that kind of crunch this data for us. Mm-hmm. These kind of things are going to be huge for us because we're not going to be able to do it without a huge technological leap. Like to become a type 1 civilization, whilst it doesn't sound like that crazy on paper, it's actually quite difficult to achieve, because you could almost make an argument that like the great filter probably is the type 1 civilization, like whether or not they can figure out how to correctly utilize their planet, or whether they do it wrong with like fossil fuels and stuff and burn themselves out or self-destruct before they're able to reach like a clean, renewable, everlasting civilization.
Yeah, I think the type 1 being sort of a great filter, I think it's a good point, because we're sort of seeing it now is that it's quite easy to make energy, but it's quite difficult to make energy efficiently and renewably in a way that's sustainable. So it's going to be, I think over the next sort of 50 years or so, it'll be interesting to see how that sort of percentage of energy changes from non-renewables to renewables, because I sort of come at this from more like a infrastructure point of view, but like ultimately everything is energy. Everything that you want to do, if you want to build a road or if you want to grow food or anything, it's energy that's required. So it's going to be interesting to see sort of how we manage that, because it's not just sort of, oh, can we turn the lights on, can we turn our computers on? It is like our whole civilization requires energy to do stuff. So
yeah, and I'm not sure if any listeners follow either of us on Twitter, but it was like when you're having your rant about biofuels, even like it's the same kind of thing. It's like it's not just about, like you're saying, switching lights off or utilizing the correct thing. It's also about kind of like stopping maybe some of the processes that we're doing and changing them for ones that are just better, because we have to. It's just about being better. It's not about what makes the most money, kind of thing. But one thing I find really interesting about the Kardashev scale, and this might just be humanity because, we're a crazy bunch, but we're kind of like slipping between the first, we're like jumping to the second one. Well, we're getting started on the second one before we finish the first one.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting, because that almost in a way kind of means that maybe the Kardashev scale should be split into like 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, because I feel like, especially the multi-planetary bit and then harnessing those planets, I can imagine, yes, on paper, it makes sense to have the type 1 where you master your area first and then you move on. But I could definitely see humanity maybe doing this first on another planet before it's fully adopted here on Earth. Like I could see Mars, for instance, when we finally set up colonies and stuff, being like 100% renewable, because that technology will have been deployed straight away, into comparison to like here on Earth, where it could take even longer for everybody to finally adopt it, kind of thing. And that's kind of interesting in itself, because then once those species are on 2 planets, are you both still acting like under like humanity? And is that still considered like one civilization, or are you both breaking off into each other and then one civilization is instantly starting at type 1 and the other one is still trying to adopt it?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, about sort of like transition from type 1 to type 2, and I think the Kardashev scale has its use, and it's definitely like an interesting thing to think about, but like it doesn't really make much sense to have them completely separate, because if a civilization got to the point where it would 100% maximized all of the energy on its planet, but hadn't started doing things off the planet, like regarding its sun, then like suddenly overnight the planet would be like at overcapacity.
Yeah.
And there would be no way to like just imagine like if the humans didn't have sort of rockets or any sort of space technology, and we just kept growing and growing and growing, everything else we're doing,
Yeah.
and we got to a point where we'd used all of the energy on our planet, but we had no way of getting off the planet. That, like, I think within a matter of weeks, that would be a really, really serious problem.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I'd agree with you, because it feels like the Kardashev scale, it kind of takes the approach of like that whole like everything's fractal. Do you know what I mean? Like you zoom out a little bit and you have like a solar system, and you zoom out a little bit more, and then there's loads of solar systems. It's in a galaxy, and you zoom out a little bit more, and it's super clusters. And it's just, I think they're kind of just taking that approach of like stepping stones, where once a species has mastered its planet, it will probably go on to master its surrounding planets. But I do agree with you. It does feel like there needs to be either room for bits in between, or like different ways of you like being able to navigate it. Because I can also imagine, say, if said civilization happens to evolve next to like a smaller star that is putting out less heat, and they're able to like live closer to it and take in more energy or anything like that, they're going to have a huge advantage. Say if they've got a certain kind of set of particles in their gas cloud that ends up forming into like a solar system or something, say over somewhere that might not have any water or something, or has very much less kind of thing, or even like discussed in that Netflix series, I think it's called Alien Worlds, where like you could just have a super Earth where the Earth's gravity is twice as big, and then that civilization physically can't get out of orbit with a rocket because you just can't beat physics, kind of thing. So it is interesting, but it is good to kind of like use, I feel like, especially with type 1 kind of thing, I actually really like the Kardashev scale from 0 to 1, because I think it's a very good way of gauging like where humanity's at and where we're kind of going. And it's also kind of good going from like 1 to 2, but it gets a little bit crazy when you get to like type 3, because having control over all of the energy in an entire galaxy is kind of like an unfathomable feat for us.
I don't even sort of see how you could do that, to be honest, like meaningfully. Like we're coming back to sort of Dyson spheres and type 2 civilizations, but what does it even mean to be able to harness the energy of a galaxy? Presumably the sort of a large part of it would be sort of supermassive black hole at the center of it, and I've seen sort of plans to do stuff with that. I've seen some crazy things of like you could feed the black hole like other planets and stuff, and then when like the accretion disk, that as it heats up and things, it then like spurts out energy, and we could use that energy. And actually, I remember doing this in like physics in like second year of university. You do the maths on it, and like a black hole is the most efficient way of making energy because it's just gravitationally like potential fed. And I think the efficiency is 50%, which is like the maximum that you can get out of it, which is many, many times more efficient than sort of semiconductors and the sort of other things you have on it. So actually, it would be a really good way to go about stuff. But being able to sort of like feed black hole planets and harness that from the accretion disk just doesn't. It's not something that I can even get my head around. So.
I can imagine like without being that guy that jumps into that realm, like it's more so on the lines of like any civilization that's probably digitalized themselves or gone like the AI route, and it's just more so about how much energy can we have because we want to run like the most crazy supercomputer ever known, and we're gonna just go for it kind of thing. Because it's like you're saying, it's such a big scale as well. Like even if like humanity was to do that, like the time scale and like how long it would take for information to go all around the galaxy, and for like humans to stay in touch kind of thing, like it's impossible with like any kind of form of technology that we've got now. Well, it's not impossible, but it'd take millions of years for anything to get like passed around if it was like radio or something. And yeah, I agree with you, because it is crazy, but it's funny because like a lot of the like sci-fi books stuff I used to read, like all the Halo ones and stuff, they always reference like type 3 like AI civilizations and stuff, and like the ideas that they come up with like artificial like ring worlds, and how they like find planets and they monitor species, and if the species go the wrong way, in their evolutionary path, they like deorbit the moon to finish the species off and kind of like restart and stuff. And it's like, it's crazy. It's like planets become petri dishes and you just get to run like planetary experiments. But it's a little bit like out of reach of thinking about because it's just so crazy. It's kind of like the brain in the jar kind of idea where it's just all about collecting data.
Yeah. Well, do we want to sort of start at type 1 and just sort of discuss what that might look like and what we think sort of technologies and stuff could be used to do that? Would that be a good place to start?
I think that's a good place. So, off the top of your head, Matty, type 1, what kind of technologies do you think humanity's going to be using? Because from what I can imagine, it's kind of similar to now, but just with better processes and just better use of the technology in the right place and at the right time, kind of thing.
Yeah, but I think so. This is the thing: is like a true type 1, like 100% efficiency. Things always like get missed and stuff, and like it's sort of like, what is even the point?
Yeah,
sort of thing. So I think for me, a type 1 would be sort of things like vast arrays of solar panels in deserts and things. And we are entirely able to power humans at a sort of like a Western world style civilization from just renewable energy. That would be me, sort of thing. So I know I said in the past I did that calculation on Brian Cox's Horizon episode, and how the sort of worldwide average of energy usage is about a tenth of what a typical Brit or an American will use.
Yeah.
I think if we got to the point that everyone on Earth had a sort of lifestyle similar to me, so they had electronics and go on holiday and drive a car and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
If everyone on Earth got to that point and all of that was powered renewably, then that would be type 1 done. And I think personally there's always going to be sort of other things, obviously, sort of things like nuclear and Iceland, for example, uses geothermal, and it's not obviously suitable for everywhere, but I think the main way will be vast arrays of solar panels and wind turbines, just powering stuff.
Do you what about, because this is something that's just popped into my head, what about like agriculture and farming? Because I can assume that would fall under energy as well, because I can imagine to be a type 1 civilization, there is no world famine. Like everybody eats.
Yeah.
Which
I think
at the same time, that's going to be a difficult thing to overcome unless we go down the route of like 3D printing meat and all of the crazy stuff that they want to like talk about.
I think it can be. There's two things. I think it can be done. Okay, obviously, the crops themselves are renewable. They use sunlight. But if you can make all the processes around it, so whether that's, the tractors driving through the fields, the processing of materials, all of that stuff, if all of that is made to use renewable energy in that way and is running off the system, then I think that sort of takes care for itself. But I think more so is that over the next sort of 20, 30 years, because of climate change, we're going to see energy demands just massively increase.
Yeah.
And when I say sort of a Western style lifestyle, I think our Western style lifestyle is going to have to take 2 times as much energy, because we're not going to be able to just use sunlight for food, because vast amounts of the planet are being turned into desert.
Yeah.
So instead of just sort of relying on sunlight, we're going to have to use sort of hydroponics and lighting and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And obviously water is another one. We're running out of water, and it's probably going to get to the point where lots of people, instead of just getting water from a sort of a spring source, which is obviously free energy wise, apart from obviously bottling and transporting.
Yeah.
But it's basically a free water source. We're going to have to be doing sort of desalinization, which takes a huge amount of energy. And if you sort of get to the point of, okay, we're all sort of using our computers and driving around and taking planes and stuff, and all of our food is grown underground in sort of lit caverns, and all of our water is taken from the sea, that's a huge amount of energy that needs to be produced. Like, it's vast amount of energy. And you could easily see us having to use 10 times as much energy as we need now. And then suddenly those sorts of figures about the amount of solar panels and wind turbines we have to build get very, very big.
Do you think there? And I'm not saying now like anything ridiculous. I'm maybe talking more so like seeding like clouds and stuff. But would you say a Type 1 civilization's gonna have to figure out certain kind of weather manipulation kind of things in order to kind of like keep a process going to the best it could be? And when I say that, I mean more so like using, I don't know, like just farming like the clouds a little bit more and seeding and stuff, because I know they do that a little bit in America, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Where there's droughts and stuff.
I think, to be honest, the more sensible thing is to combat climate change.
Yeah.
Like, make things renewable, and then let's just work on trying to get the carbon emissions down.
Yeah.
And carbon capture as well, try and just reduce it. That's going to be, I think, ultimately what we're going to have to do, because I say this all quite optimistically. I think far more likely what's going to happen is that sort of nations and continents are going to fall massively behind, and are going to have a very low energy usage. And I said, like, energy usage is everything. If you know, energy is what allows us to build schools and allows us to build hospitals and stuff. So, you know, it's from our sort of perspective in like the UK. Oh yeah, I can turn off some lights and I can, you know, I'll bike to work instead of driving sort of 2 days a week, whatever it is, something like that.
Yeah.
Your energy usage is still vastly bigger than someone in sub-Saharan Africa, just from the amenities that you have around you. You know, the energy has gone into just producing the things you have. Even if you don't use them, even if you say, "Oh, I'm not going to use my car at all," even just having the car is more energy than someone in that situation will use over 1 or 2 or 3 years, sort of thing. So it's very easy to say, "Oh, we need to cut down energy usage and stuff," but when people have got no energy and they need energy to be able to get to a better standard of living, I think it's a sort of a difficult balancing act. And we are going to see, as more people sort of get lifted out of poverty and get a Western style of a living, then energy usage is going to peak massively. So we're going to have to try and keep up with that. But it is promising. I'm already seeing things. Have you seen recently Singapore? They've got a plan to build this huge sort of solar array in Australia, and then they're going to hook it up with underwater cables.
Yes.
So like all of Singapore is going to be powered off Australian sunlight.
That's insane.
Yeah.
But no, that's really cool. All right, then. Well, maybe a good idea for each of these as we kind of like work our way through them is we both have to say a date, like a year that we think that we will reach this capability. Obviously, it's going to be too hard to do the next two, but especially with this one, like if you had to pick like a time frame or like a year kind of thing, what would you say?
My sort of realistic but optimistic, everyone on Earth is okay, and we've got these big solar arrays and wind turbines powering everything. I would say 2100.
2100.
Mm-hmm.
So 75 years.
Yeah.
See, do you know what's crazy about that? Because I agree with you, right? But what is nuts is it has took this long to get to 0.7, and we will do the other 0.3 in 70 years, just because of like how quick and how exponential technology is just going. And like, that's nuts. Like, it's took all of humanity's history to get to this point, and then in the next 70 years, we're going to do half of what it's took again.
I think the difficulty will be that last 10 or 20% of the human population. Like I would say 80% of humans by 2050 will have this sort of, everything's green. You know, we're seeing it places like Norway.
Yeah, that's true.
Some countries, I think it's Costa Rica. You know, ones that are quite fortuitous, they have like lots of hydropower or geothermal and stuff, are already 100% renewable. So like they're done. So I think sort of 2050, 80% of the world's population will be 100% renewable. Everything's hooked up on a big electrical grid, all good sort of thing. That would be I would say 2050, 2060. It's going to be that last sort of 10% or 20% of the population getting them. Because it's not just like moving from fossil fuels to electric or something. It's starting from basically nothing and building up the infrastructure. Like big parts of the world have not got an electrical grid.
Yeah.
that just doesn't pop up in 10 years.
Well, it was like we were discussing in one of our first ever episodes. I think it's like Cities of the Future, which I'm sure we'll return to in this series. But like you were saying, how like certain countries, even like Africa, like parts of Africa, they're just gonna completely skip the Industrial Revolution and go straight into like Western culture kind of thing. And yeah, there's so much that needs to be done. And like, because I agree with you, growing up in a Western culture and always living in like a Western culture, I've obviously like been to visit Eastern like countries and different cultures and stuff, but it's quite hard to like remember that most of the world isn't built up kind of thing. And it's like there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So, but I'd agree with you. I'd say around about 2100, I think, is a good place to put it. But yeah, I don't know. The only thing that makes me nervous is climate change. I don't know if we're gonna figure it out before it's too late. But that is definitely a conversation for another time. So type 2, stellar civilization. So this is taking control of all of the energy in our planetary system. So this one's a little bit more difficult because I think even like I think it was Stephen Hawkins that said we might be able to like colonize the moons of Saturn and Jupiter within like 250 years, which is a long time, but probably about right because it's going to take so long to even get Mars right, and then the distances as well. I know it's not like years in distance, but it's the science that is going to be required and like the energy usage of getting things to those moons as well. Like it's going to be insane. And then it's not just the exploration aspect of it too. Like we've got to explore all of them, then colonize them, and then utilize them 100% efficiently. And it's not just the planets either. Like it's like you mentioned before, like the Dyson spheres, and that like it's just crazy. Like that's for me, that seems like something that's like thousands of years off.
Yeah, I think.
And I don't even think it's going to be humans that do it. I think that kind of thing is more likely to be the robots if we make them.
Yeah. But I think again, it's similar to type 1. Is that are we really talking about building a Dyson sphere around the whole sun? Because obviously, like Earth, for example, there's a bit of radioactivity in the ground that produces other energy, but I'm going to say to 99.9% of the solar system's energy comes from the sun. Yeah. Are we talking about when we talk about type 2? Are you actually talking about building a Dyson sphere that completely surrounds the sun and we get 100% of the energy from it, or are we talking about we have multiple planets with this sort of enough renewable energy that we can do what we want, sort of thing? And I think they're very different because I can imagine just 1% of the sun's total power will be enough for us to go zipping around the solar system, send stuff out to other sort of planet, other suns, other stars. Yeah. So I think again, it's a sort of, it's obviously not a problem. The Kardashev scale is what it is, but it's a sort of, just sort of something to bear in mind. It's like, what were we actually talking about? And when we say type 2, are we really talking about Dyson spheres? Or are we talking about a sort of a civilization that has enough energy to do what it wants within its own system, sort of thing? So
it's interesting you say that, because I wonder what ideologies you have when you're like doing projects like that. Like what is your priority when you are harnessing all of the energy from your solar system? Because like for anyone that like doesn't know, a Dyson sphere, isn't it? It's basically just a load of satellites or solar panels that are like either in an orbit, or it's a massive megastructure that encompasses the sun, and it basically takes all of the energy from the sun. And I think what I read as well, there are some that rotate and they can change the output as well on the planet. So if a planet's getting too hot or too cold, they can like mediate the amount of like energy it gets. So like on paper, that sounds amazing. But like from a technological standpoint, like the sun is, first of all, so much bigger than like Like, do we even have enough material in our solar system to
like,
do something like that?
It's something like 99.8% of the solar system's material is in the sun.
Yeah.
So how could we possibly mine enough in the rest of the solar system to build enough stuff to go around it? Like,
Yeah, because I feel like to do something like that, you're probably going to have to go and take from multiple solar systems.
Yeah.
To then have that for your solar system, and then as a civilization, does destroying like 4 solar systems or like planetary systems account for the amount of energy that you could get from one star, or does it make more sense to spread the civilization out between the 4 planetary systems and everybody kind of lives happily ever after for 4 billion years? Because then I think it becomes a question of, does the civilization go down the route of energy and data, or like longevity and like just freedom and peace and happiness?
Yeah, I think that's what I think, at least, is. And we said before, like, this is all sort of hypothetical and it's based on our current humanity's, like, what we are, sort of thing. But I don't ever see us getting to the point of, let's go to Europa, or let's go to Mars or something. Oh, we need power. How are we going to do this? Immediately I'd be thinking, let's put solar panels down. Let's use the planet's geothermal. Let's do something that is here.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, let's try and capture all the energy from the sun. Like, I don't see what use that would be. I don't see like what benefit that would have. And
yeah, no, I'd agree with you.
Yeah. So for me, Type 2 is not a Dyson sphere or those sorts of things. It's just it will be, we're on most of the planets that are all, the hospitable places in the solar system.
Yeah.
And those civilizations are sort of
living clean kind of thing. Yeah. Like
yeah.
they're not making it worse. They're just,
yeah.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with you. And I think the Dyson spheres especially, that's probably chucked in Type 3. And thinking about it now, like those kind of things, they kind of fall more into like that idea of, is it like, I think it could be the grey goo thing, that idea where like that kind of then makes sense. Like you'd have some AI that would be like, send a load of probes out to all these solar systems. It's just going to convert the planets into matter. And then those robots are then going to build Dyson spheres, and then we're going to blast that energy back to our one solar system. And we're just going to live happily ever after. Yeah. And every time a civilization sends out a radio signal, we'll send a probe to their planet to be turned into a Dyson sphere. And that's just kind of the way it goes. But yeah, I think as well, the other really interesting thing about the Kardashev scale is every type you go up, it feels like the civilizations have got more chance of failing. Like you're almost stretching yourself too far. Because for us now, I feel like, getting to Type 1 could definitely be the great filter, because it's about learning what we're doing is right, whether or not we're using things correctly. And like with climate change and everything, like we've seen how when we've done things wrong or made mistakes in the past. And then with like Type 2, you could totally see like civilization stretching out between planets, and then maybe having something like, I don't know if you ever watched The Expansion. Have you ever seen the show Expansion?
No.
Okay, so it is an Amazon show, and it's pretty cool. It's set like 200 years in the future, and it's about the colony on Mars. And it's like really cool. And basically the colony on Mars, because they're all like renewable and everything's like really good, their ideologies begin to change with the ideologies on Earth, and people on Earth are being very resistant and not wanting to like go fully renewable because they don't believe it's true, kind of thing, like flat Earth kind of silly stuff. And they end up going to war with each other, and it's like really interesting because it's like humanity, like all the scientists and everything are on Mars, and they're like, we really want to like change the world, wake up kind of thing, and like Earth is just like, no, and they kind of like have a bit of a war and stuff. And I can imagine when you become like a Type 2 civilization and you start stretching out between the planets and stuff, like it's already hard enough to have international law on a planet. Do you know what I mean? And like, I can imagine when you start having it on planets, like that must just go out the window. Like you thought sea pirates were bad, you wait until we get space pirates.
Yeah. I've said before, this idea of I just don't see it being feasible that humans as one civilization would occupy. Maybe we could, the moon, okay, maybe Mars.
Yeah.
I'd say
maybe a few research posts out on a
Yeah.
couple of moons that if you go there, that's your life kind of thing.
I think a good analogy is something like the bases we have in Antarctica.
Yeah.
The reason why they are, let's just say British, like the British Antarctic Survey. The reason why they're British scientists is because they come from Britain. We send them over there for 6 months, and then they come back in the winter, and then we send them again. If we got like a big group of people, put them in Antarctica, and then they were building their own houses and doing their stuff, I would say, within 10, 20 years, that wouldn't then be the British Antarctic Survey. That would be a micronation on Antarctica.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same thing. If we are, just sending people to these places, they live there for a while, and they, a bit like the International Space Station, they come and go sort of thing, then that's humans doing something. If you get to the point where people are born on Mars and die on Mars and never leave Mars and just live their entire lives there, then that's not really humans. That's like, that's not really Earthlings. That's then a
Martian.
new civilization. So yeah, and so the moon and Mars maybe, but particularly when you start getting outside of the solar system, like with the distances it takes, it's not. But for me, it's not humans anymore. It's some other civilization that has budded off and doing their own thing. So.
Yeah, especially when you get to Type 3 and it's galaxies.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is just like, I can't even begin to comprehend.
Yeah, at that point, I don't ever see it. Well, it maybe could happen, but I don't ever see it being completed, because I think civilizations will get into wars. If you're talking about doing these huge things, and this is massive amounts of energy, then it is feasible that civilizations could just wipe out an entire star system because they need the energy.
Yeah.
So I think at that point, this idea of humans are doing great things sort of goes out the window, and it's more, let's just consume as much energy as we can, sort of thing. So
yeah, one thing actually I did want to say, I had this little bit in my notes. There's a strong speculation and suggestion from a couple of people that have kind of looked into the idea of the Kardashev scale, that between Type 0 and Type 1 has the highest risk of self-destruction, because it's about the species kind of how they adapt to the technology and whether or not it's self-destructive, which I thought is quite interesting, because you can kind of see that. And that kind of falls a little bit in line even with not an energy standpoint, when we had our internet and technology discussion, and we were talking about how because society could collapse too. It doesn't need to be an energy problem. Do you know what I mean? So I thought that was quite interesting how they were saying that between Type 0 and Type 1. And then they think between Type 1 and Type 2, the most likely way of it going wrong basically is an excessive use of energy, most likely the inability to dispose of heat, and just the civilizations and planets and all that kind of stuff would just burn themselves out, which I thought was kind of cool. No actual anything I wanted to talk about that. I just thought it was interesting that they were saying that especially between Type 0 and Type 1 had the highest risk of self-destruction, because you can definitely see that, and it's definitely the biggest pull up the boots moment, because it's go from not having anything put together to everything being put together.
Yeah, again, this idea of you said about between Type 1 and Type 2, this idea of overheating, that to me doesn't. I don't see how we could use all of the energy from the sun.
Yeah.
If you were using some of the energy from the sun has to be dispersed, has to go places. If all of the energy from the sun you suddenly put on Earth, we'd be finished.
Yeah.
We're a very small speck in this the sun's sky, so we capture a very small amount of it anyway. Big parts of it are just reflected back, and the rest of it is not that efficiently used. If we just collected it all and used it all, then That's a lot of heat, and like your room at the moment, you got these big computers going.
Yeah.
It's going to get very warm very quickly.
Yeah, and as well, like even like when we've been discussing like our interplanetary contamination episode, like these kind of things don't seem feasible because, like, say if we find like microbial life on like Venus or Mars, then you kind of it wouldn't be fair to like stop that like evolutionary path and just take it all for Earth, because like, not saying that this would happen either, but like, can you imagine if a type 3 just showed up, they're like, your son's ours now, peace, kind of thing, like you don't need it, like what would you do, kind of thing. So I can imagine like we'd probably do the same thing, like we already do it, like when we discussed in our interplanetary contamination episode, with like this idea that if we found life somewhere, we'd probably leave the planet alone, even if it's microbial life or something, because we wouldn't want to like damage it or change its course, kind of thing. And I can imagine, like, with the amount of exoplanets and stuff that we're finding, and like everything that seems promising with like this idea of microbial life in places, it seems like that's not going to be too hard to find. Almost like type 2 and type 3 kind of go out the window based off current rules that we have, because we've already kind of decided that we'd leave those places alone.
I think personally, to get to a proper type 2 or a type 3, you need some sort of benevolent force, that just wants as much energy as possible, whether that's future humans that have some reason to harness energy for some odd reason, or whether that's AI and gone rogue. I don't know, but like, I don't see a type 2 or type 3 coming about from just morally conscious humans doing good things. So
yeah, I'd agree with you. And then kind of finally the last little bits, which I'll kind of just chuck in there at the end, but these are like way out there. If you thought type 3 was bad, wait till you hear type 4. So type 4 is the idea that a civilization would have control of its entire supercluster, which is just even more crazy. How many, like, there are billions of stars in a galaxy, and if there are billions of galaxies in a supercluster, like, there's just so much energy. It's too many zeros for my head. And then type 5 would be the entire universe, which obviously is even more crazy. And then type 6, if there is a type 6, is the idea that possibly it'd be ones that would have power over a multiverse if it existed. So yeah, nuts.
Yeah, pretty crazy.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. And we've kind of come up on time, really. So yeah, if you've enjoyed this week's episode on the Kardashev scale, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, write us a nice review, because it helps with the rankings. And if you're listening on Spotify or Google, make sure you're following us, because then you'll be notified when new episodes come out. We've also, I don't actually think we've really talked about it that much because we always forget, but we've also launched a show called This Week on Planet Earth, and that also comes out on a Friday, and it's just on YouTube. And basically it's the news section that used to be in the podcast, but because of all of the crazy stuff that we downloaded and all of the awesome lore that went down on social media, it now exists as its own show. So if you're missing the news part of the podcast, you can head over to This Week on Planet Earth to check that out. And yeah, if you've got any questions or you want to hit us up on social media, it's at Infinite Void Pod on Instagram and Twitter. And you can hit me up at Jacob E. Carson and Matty at the Matty JMP. And if you want to drop us an email, or you've got a guest suggestion or a topic suggestion, it's theinfinitevoidpodcast@gmail.com. And we've also got an Instagram, Twitter, Patreon. So if you want to check the Patreon out too, that's also cool. And then one last shout out, because I know I've got so many shout outs. I've also launched a cool Marvel podcast. So if there's any Marvel nerds listening and you like that kind of stuff, go and check it out. It's called Manifesting Marvel. And yeah, we will catch you next week or the week after in the Infinite Void, because we've got some cool stuff being planned. So yeah, see you then. Hey everyone, we wanted to take a moment to tell you about our brand new Patreon page.
Yeah, so we've devised a load of new goodies that are neatly packaged across 3 different tiers for you.
Tiers start at £3 and go all the way up to £10 a month.
Just to say, the Patreon is in no way an obligation, and we're going to continue making the podcast as it is freely available across all the platforms. But if you'd like to support us and show your support, you can now.
So yeah, head over to patreon.com/Infinite Void Pod for more information.